One of the strange things about Henry is that we don't really know what he dies of. It's very hard to medically diagnose for centuries.
The stone trembled first, just slightly, just enough that the dust cascading from its edges appeared almost intentional, as though the centuries themselves were exhaling. For days, the archaeologists had worked in the cool hush beneath Windsor, chipping and brushing at the limestone threshold of a chamber no ground-penetrating survey had ever identified. The moment the slab moved, even by a fraction, the lights around the enclosure flickered off its polished face, revealing carvings that no one had realized were there. And then, with one last heave, the entrance to the long-buried chamber opened wider than a hand's breadth, sending a rush of stale, ancient air over the team. It wasn't the smell of age alone, it carried something else, something cold and metallic, like a memory of fear hiding behind iron. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. What they had believed to be a minor annex sealed off during later renovations proved to be a doorway into an untouched void. For years, historians had debated whether Henry VIII, known for his marriages, his break with Rome, and his relentless reshaping of England, had left behind more than the tomb at St. George's Chapel. There were whispers in Tudor letters, private diaries, and obscure inventories hinting at a hidden chamber prepared at the king's command, a chamber meant not for burial, but for concealment. Now the archaeologists, with their gloves still trembling from the effort of lifting the entrance stone, stood before a space that might finally force the world to rethink everything it believed about the notorious monarch. Inside, the darkness was absolute, swallowing the glare of modern lamps at first. But as the dust settled, shapes emerged piece by piece. It was not the expected jumble of medieval debris, nor the elegant restraint of a royal chapel. Instead, the chamber was organized with astonishing precision. Chests of darkened oak and iron formed a perimeter around the room, each fitted with heavy locks, but each strangely uncorroded, as if protected by some forgotten treatment. Between them stood massive shelves carved directly into the rock, lined with items wrapped in thick cloth that had long since stiffened and yellowed. In the center of the room rose a stone platform, waist-high, draped in something that glittered beneath the lamplight. The archaeologists approached with caution, aware that any mishandling could destroy priceless evidence. As they carefully peeled back the brittle fabric covering the central structure, they found an object that stunned them into silence. Resting atop the platform was a sarcophagus, unmistakably Tudor in its ornamentation, yet unlike anything recorded from the period. The stone was smooth, etched with interlacing Tudor roses that seemed to shift under the eye, their petals carved so deeply they cast shadows even in artificial light. Along its edges ran a series of inscriptions in Latin, each one invoking divine, judgment, royal supremacy, and the safeguarding of England's future. What made the sight so bizarre, though, was not merely the craftsmanship, but the fact that the sarcophagus was empty. There were no remains, no shroud, no trace of human presence within the hollow interior. The archaeologists checked and rechecked, debating whether the lid might belong to another container or whether the chamber had been disturbed before. But the dust patterns proved undisturbed, sealed under sediment that had not shifted since the 16th century. The sarcophagus had been placed there deliberately, pristine and unused, as though it awaited a burial that never came. The implications unfurled rapidly through the minds of everyone present. Why would Henry VIII, or those acting in his name, commission a tomb intended to be hidden rather than displayed? Why build it in a chamber concealed behind layers of later construction? And why leave it empty? Theories swirled, but none seemed adequate. Some thought it might have been a symbolic tomb, meant as an insurance plan in case political upheaval made traditional burial impossible. Others suggested it could be a decoy, a place to hide the king's body should enemies threaten to desecrate it. But the sheer secrecy of the chamber, the precision of its ceiling, and the eerie emptiness of the sarcophagus hinted at something even more complex. Attention soon shifted to the sealed chests, each one marked with a small painted emblem. These emblems, nearly faded beyond recognition, appeared to correspond to different phases of Henry's reign. The chest nearest the entrance bore the early Tudor rose, unmarred by the later additions that symbolized Henry's consolidation of power. Another showed the split rose motif, rumored to have been designed during the king's break with the Roman Church. As the archaeologists examined the locks, they realized these were not typical storage containers. Each chest had a locking mechanism embedded with rotating metal discs etched with symbols. The symbols were not heraldic but mathematical, some resembling early alchemical notation. Whoever constructed the chamber understood cryptic engineering far beyond common Tudor craftsmanship. One chest in particular dominated the space. Larger than the others and banded with thick iron, it bore the unmistakable royal initial H encircled by a chain. The lock on this one was unlike anything any of the experts had encountered. Instead of a keyhole, it had a recessed panel filled with minute carvings, each one only visible under magnification. The carvings formed a puzzle, one that required alignment of certain shapes to trigger an internal mechanism. It appeared to be a kind of combination lock centuries before such devices were widely used. After hours of careful manipulation, an audible click echoed through the chamber. The lid swung open with a groan, releasing another breath of preserved ancient air. Inside lay a collection of objects, arranged so deliberately that they looked almost ceremonial. At the forefront rested a small wooden box wrapped with cord that had petrified over time. Behind it lay a stack of parchments protected by a casing of treated leather embossed with the same chain motif. Beneath these rested an assortment of metallic fragments, broken hinges, small gears, intricately carved brass plates, and what appeared to be components of a dismantled mechanical device. The archaeologists were especially drawn to the wooden box. Its exterior was carved with an image of a crowned falcon, Henry VIII's personal emblem during his youth. When the box was opened, its contents sent a ripple of awe through the team. Inside lay a collection of gemstones, each one cut in a fashion unfamiliar to Tudor gem-cutting practices. Their surfaces were faceted with precision more akin to later periods, yet carbon dating conducted later on the surrounding wood fibers confirmed that the box itself dated firmly to Henry's reign. Among the gemstones was a signet ring bearing the king's unmistakable seal, but this ring was unlike the ones depicted in portraits or held in museums. It featured additional engraving, fields of tiny marks that formed a geometric pattern reminiscent of coded ciphers. The discovery of the parchments only deepened the mystery. Though brittle and faded, they retained enough integrity for careful examination. Written in Henry's distinctive hand, or at least an extremely skilled imitation, were lines of Latin interwoven with annotations in English. The text involved reflections on sovereignty, divine right, and the fragility of dynastic power. But these were not typical royal proclamations. They were personal, introspective, and laced with an unease uncharacteristic of the publicly confident king. He spoke of threats to the throne not from foreign powers but from within his own lineage. He wrote of a fear that history might unravel his legacy, that his authority might be eclipsed by what he called the hidden serpent, a phrase repeated so many times it felt like a private fixation. More striking than the words themselves, however, were the diagrams accompanying them. The drawings depicted mechanical constructs, wheels within wheels, levered arms, and elaborate interlocking components. Some resembled early clockwork, but others hinted at something more abstract. These were not idle sketches, they were designs, precise and deliberate. A few pages included tables of measurements and notes on artisans capable of delicate metalwork. This suggested that Henry VIII, long associated with political and religious upheaval, had also commissioned devices whose purpose remained opaque. The brass fragments within the chest suddenly seemed less cryptic. When some were aligned according to the diagrams, they fit together with uncanny accuracy, forming a partial mechanism with gears that still rotated smoothly despite centuries of burial. The archaeologists speculated that the full device might have been intended to communicate something or conceal information, perhaps a cipher machine, perhaps a symbolic contraption meant to reassure the king's own anxieties about legacy and power. Yet the mechanism was incomplete, missing critical components that might have revealed its purpose. As the team delved deeper into the chamber, they uncovered yet another chest whose contents pushed the limits of historical expectation. Wrapped in layers of stiffened cloth were objects that appeared to be early anatomical models, wooden and ivory constructs representing limbs, joints, and organs. But these models were not purely educational. They bore small hinges and interlocking sections, as if designed to be manipulated, disassembled, and studied. Curiously, some of the joints bore traces of metal rods and pins, suggesting that Henry or his associates may have been exploring mechanical analogs of the human body. This discovery raised questions about the king's interests that had never been documented in official records. Was he curious about medicine and anatomy to an extent deeper than previously known? Or were these artifacts part of some symbolic ritual reflecting his preoccupation with lineage, uncertainty, and mortality? The object in the chamber, found only after nearly every corner had been explored, was a scroll sealed with the imprint of a Tudor rose, partially obscured by an overstrike of a different, unfamiliar symbol. The seal crumbled when touched, revealing text written in a hand far more frantic than the earlier parchments. The ink had smeared in places, as if written in haste or under distress. This document contained a warning addressed not to contemporaries, but to future generations. It spoke of hidden truths buried for the protection of England, of knowledge too dangerous for ordinary governance, and of an unnamed betrayal that the king believed could erode the foundation of the dynasty he fought so violently to secure. Though fragmented, the scroll implied that the chamber was designed not merely as a place of storage, but as a vault of secrets. Secrets Henry believed essential to the preservation of his legacy. The existence of the empty sarcophagus in the center hinted that the king had once considered sealing himself, or his memory, within this subterranean refuge. Or perhaps the sarcophagus symbolized something else entirely, a statement of control, a contingency plan against uncertainty, or a monument to fears he was never willing to admit publicly. The implications of these discoveries rippled far beyond the stone walls of the hidden chamber. Scholars began re-evaluating assumptions about Henry VIII's motivations, interests, and psychological landscape. The artifacts suggested a ruler far more complex than the bombastic king known from portraits and textbooks. He appeared as a man grappling with profound insecurities, constructing layers of secrecy to guard against perceived threats, real or imagined. The mechanical designs hinted at an intellect fascinated by innovation, perhaps even driven by the desire to encode messages for posterity. The gemstones and signet ring hinted at symbolic rituals or unfinished plans requiring tools not yet understood. Even more striking was the sense that the chamber was incomplete. The missing components of the mechanical device, the empty sarcophagus, and the abrupt tone of the final scroll all suggested that Henry's plans were interrupted. Perhaps illness intervened, perhaps political turmoil forced him to abandon the project. Perhaps those closest to him decided the chamber's contents were too unsettling to reveal. Whatever the reason, the silence that followed the chamber's sealing preserved the mystery for centuries, allowing the modern world to confront a version of Henry VIII unfiltered by chroniclers or propagandists. The discovery reshaped discussions around Tudor history, prompting questions about how much of the past might still lie buried beneath castles, cathedrals, and ancient estates. The chamber demonstrated that even the most documented lives contain hidden dimensions, sealed away beneath layers of stone and secrecy. It challenged the assumption that royal narratives are fixed, reminding historians that rulers often conceal as much as they reveal. Yet the chamber's greatest impact lay in its ability to evoke wonder, as though one could step directly into the mind of a king whose ambitions, fears, and obsessions had shaped a nation. Standing within that space, surrounded by chests of encoded objects and cryptic designs, one could almost sense the tension that had driven Henry VIII to create such a place. It was a vault of legacy, a fortress against erasure, a sanctuary built to withstand the erosion of time. By the time the archaeologists sealed the chamber again for preservation, they understood that what they had uncovered was not merely a hidden room or a collection of forgotten artifacts. It was a revelation, one that peeled back the layers of a monarch long shrouded in myth and contradiction. The chamber's contents told a story not of power alone, but of vulnerability, creativity, and an unyielding desire to be remembered on his own terms. And as they stepped back, allowing the passageway to fall into darkness once more. They knew the echoes of this discovery would reverberate for generations. The sealed chamber beneath the earth had yielded its secrets at last. Not the remains of a king, but the unfiltered imprint of his mind, preserved in stone, metal, parchment, and mystery. In the end, the unbelievable part was not what they found, but what it revealed. A portrait of Henry VIII, unlike any the world had ever known, waiting in silence for nearly 5 centuries to be uncovered. What startled the team most in the days that followed was not the ornate emptiness of the sarcophagus, nor the coded mechanical fragments, but the strange coherence the chamber began to display once each artifact was documented and analyzed. It became clear that this was not a random assemblage of royal curiosities. Despite spanning diverse categories, mechanical devices, gemstones, anatomical models, encoded manuscripts, each item appeared to serve an intentional function within a broader conceptual framework. The more the archaeologists studied the chamber, the more they realized that Henry VIII had curated this place as though it were an extension of his mind, a concealed archive for ideas too volatile for the political stage. It represented a realm where the monarch could preserve thoughts and ambitions shielded from the prying eyes of courtiers, foreign spies, and even his own heirs. The chamber walls themselves suggested this deliberate design. Under centuries of dust, faint pigments shimmered along the limestone, hints of frescoes that once adorned the space. When cleaned with meticulous precision, these pigments revealed a mural spanning the entire circumference of the chamber, an extraordinary discovery entirely overlooked in the initial rush of unsealing. The mural depicted a colossal tree whose roots twisted downward into darkness and whose branches reached upward toward an expanse of stylized golden stars. Each branch bore a name or emblem associated with Tudor lineage. Yet, curiously, several branches diverged into symbols no historian recognized, shapes resembling intertwined serpents, angular runes, and peculiar sigils positioned far from the familiar heraldic designs of Henry's family tree. At the heart of the mural stood a figure unmistakably meant to represent the king himself. Henry's likeness was stylized, almost mythic, cloaked in deep crimson, wearing a crown larger than any he had ever been depicted with in official portraits. His hands were depicted holding 2 distinct objects, one a sword, rendered with exaggerated sharpness, and the other an orb split open to reveal something hidden inside. The detail in this cracked orb was astonishing. Tiny lines and miniature inscriptions had been painstakingly painted into the exposed interior, as though the artist meant to capture the idea of a fractured world or a secret contained within the very concept of authority. Art historians brought in for consultation noted that the mural diverged sharply from standard Tudor iconography. Instead, it blended medieval symbolism with early Renaissance metaphysics, echoing themes of cosmic order and hidden knowledge. The mural's uppermost section, where the branches disappeared into starlight, blended into a swirling pattern that seemed almost celestial. Some experts speculated that the chamber might have been used for ritualized contemplation, functioning as a private sanctuary where the king confronted his fears of genealogical instability and political upheaval. One historian proposed a bolder theory. The chamber represented Henry VIII's attempt to craft an alternative record of his reign, one free from the constraints of public scrutiny. The murals, chests, and encoded designs could constitute a personal counter-narrative, shaped not by chroniclers seeking royal favor, but by Henry's own obsessions. This was not propaganda meant for the masses, this was legacy crafted for posterity, hidden until a time when he believed future generations might understand him in ways his contemporaries never could. The mural alone would have been enough to rewrite perceptions of Henry, but the inscriptions woven into its branches added another layer of intrigue. Each segment contained fragments of text, some in Latin, others in Greek, and a few in archaic forms of English. Translations revealed phrases contemplating destiny, divine will, and the volatile nature of succession. More perplexing were the lines that seemed to refer to threats unnamed in historical records: the cloaked pretender, the sleeping claim, and the sorrowed blood. These enigmatic terms suggested that Henry may have feared rivals or claimants now lost to time, or that he perceived dangers that were more philosophical than political. The deeper the archaeologists explored, the more the chamber appeared to reflect a king grappling with the vastness of his own power. Henry VIII had reshaped England through force of will, breaking from Rome, restructuring government, and altering the religious landscape with a decisiveness unmatched by any English monarch before him. Yet within this vault, preserved beneath centuries of stone, emerged the image of a man wrestling with doubts far removed from the grandiosity of his public persona. It hinted at introspection usually absent from narratives of his reign. Attention then turned to the structural layout of the chamber. As engineers and architectural historians studied the stonework, they uncovered a network of hidden vents and channels running behind the walls, skillfully disguised beneath carvings and frescoes. These channels suggested an airflow system, primitive yet ingenious, designed to preserve delicate materials. This alone was remarkable, implying the involvement of skilled craftsmen and possibly foreign artisans. Tudor construction rarely included such mechanisms, and certainly never in secret subterranean chambers. The design bore similarities to Italian Renaissance engineering, leading some to theorize that Henry may have drawn inspiration from the innovations spreading across Europe in his lifetime. If so, it would demonstrate a degree of architectural sophistication in his private projects never before documented. Further examination revealed that the chamber was not a single space, but part of a larger, multi-room structure. Behind a panel cleverly disguised as part of the mural, archaeologists found a narrow passage leading to a smaller annex chamber. This annex, no larger than a study, contained a desk carved directly into the stone and a recess built like a bookshelf. While the shelves were mostly empty, the desk bore markings suggesting it had once supported writing implements and perhaps additional scrolls or journals. The discovery of small grooves etched into the desktop, the exact size and width of quill tips, suggested that this room may have been used for writing drafts of the encoded documents found in the main chamber. But the most surprising aspect of the annex was its acoustics. A whisper uttered near its entrance reverberated unnaturally, amplified without echo. This phenomenon pointed to deliberate architectural design, possibly intended to allow a single reader to hear his own voice clearly while studying or reciting texts. Such acoustic chambers existed in monastic settings, where controlled sound environments supported meditation and chanting. The implication that Henry VIII, or someone close to him, desired such a contemplative space within a hidden vault introduced another layer to the chamber's psychological significance. As interpretations expanded, attention returned to the incomplete mechanical device discovered in the first chest. Metallurgists analyzing the fragments noticed an unusual alloy composition containing trace elements not commonly used in Tudor England. This alloy exhibited surprising resilience, resisting corrosion more effectively than typical 16th century metals. When compared to known artifacts from the period, the alloy showed experimental qualities as though it had been crafted by a metallurgist testing new formulations. This finding suggested that the creation of the device involved experimentation, innovation, and potentially secrecy surrounding metallurgical methods. Piecing together the mechanical fragments, experts hypothesized that the apparatus might have been designed to operate through rotational ciphers. The presence of small pins and interlocking gears hinted at a device capable of encoding or decoding messages through mechanical movement. If true, Henry VIII may have been engaged in the development of an early cryptographic machine centuries ahead of its time. This possibility alone shook the academic world, challenging long-held assumptions about the evolution of cryptography in Europe. It hinted at a monarch far more involved in the mechanics of secrecy and communication than any contemporary records had suggested. Researchers debated the impetus behind such hidden innovation. Was Henry driven by fear of espionage from foreign courts? Was he attempting to safeguard correspondence that even his closest advisors could not access? Or did the machine hold symbolic value, representing his desire to control not only the governance of England, but also the flow of information itself? While technical experts explored these material questions, historians sifted through the encoded manuscripts with increasing urgency. A few lines translated from the hastiest portions of the final scroll made references to the mandate of the unnamed star and the inheritance sealed against corruption. These cryptic phrases raised profound questions about Henry's worldview. Some speculated that he saw his reign as part of a cosmic or divinely orchestrated plan, one threatened by forces he believed were hidden from ordinary sight. Others suggested that the rhetoric reflected the paranoia that often accompanies absolute power. The coexistence of mathematical diagrams, theological musings, and political anxieties within the documents reinforced the impression of a mind grappling with the immense weight of sovereignty. Even the placement of the empty sarcophagus gained new significance as the chamber's layers unfolded. Some scholars suggested it symbolized Henry's desire to control his legacy so completely that even his death would be shaped by his will. The empty tomb might have represented a contingency plan for an alternate burial, one isolated from the political tensions surrounding his succession. Alternatively, it may have been an artistic expression of the monarch's realization that no physical tomb could fully contain the enormity of his reign, leading him instead to craft a symbolic resting place for his private fears and ambitions. As weeks stretched into months, the magnitude of the discovery continued to expand. The deeper researchers delved, the more the chamber resembled a labyrinth of intellectual, psychological, and political significance. It overturned assumptions about Henry VIII's interests, pointing to a far more introspective and innovative ruler than the larger-than-life figure of public record. It suggested that beneath the surface of his dramatic marriages and political reforms lay a complex interior world, one shaped by fascination with mechanics, coded language, lineage, prophecy, and the fragile nature of power. The discovery also forced historians to reconsider the broader context of Tudor secrecy. If Henry VIII had commissioned such a chamber, it raised the possibility that other monarchs may have constructed similar hidden repositories of knowledge, now lost beneath centuries of architectural modification. The existence of this vault beneath Windsor suggested a hidden history of subterranean spaces within royal estates, built not for burial, but for safeguarding ideas too dangerous to confront openly. What had once been a simple question, why was the chamber sealed, now evolved into a deeper inquiry. Perhaps the chamber was sealed not because it contained something forbidden, but because it represented a version of the king that could not be reconciled with the public image required to maintain order in a tumultuous era. Perhaps those who knew of its existence feared the implications of exposing the anxieties and ambitions sealed within. Or perhaps Henry himself decreed its concealment, believing the world was not yet ready for the truths it contained. As the archaeologists carefully catalogued each artifact, their understanding of Tudor history shifted irrevocably. They were no longer uncovering objects alone. They were uncovering a consciousness preserved in stone. The chamber did not merely reveal lost treasures, it revealed the interior architecture of power and legacy as envisioned by a king who shaped the destiny of a nation. And though many questions remained unanswered, one truth became undeniable. The sealed chamber had shattered the conventional portrait of Henry VIII. It unveiled a sovereign who pondered the intricacies of mortality, the mechanics of secrecy, the fractal nature of lineage, and the possibility that the greatest threats to his reign lay not in external enemies, but in the unseen corridors of history itself. As historians and researchers pushed further into the implications of the find, attention began shifting to the quietest detail of all, one nearly missed in the initial excitement. Along the lowest edge of the mural, beneath the sprawling tree and barely above the chamber floor, ran a narrow band of symbols unlike anything else in the room. These markings did not resemble the ornate Latin inscriptions above, nor the geometric cipher patterns seen in Henry's manuscripts. Instead, they formed a continuous line of small characters carved with exquisite precision, each one slightly different from the next, as though someone had attempted to encode a message using a script outside Europe's conventional alphabets. Linguists noted faint similarities to characters found in early Near Eastern manuscripts, though none matched directly. The symbols were arranged with rhythmic spacing, suggesting grammar or poetic structure rather than random embellishment. The idea that Henry VIII, or one of the scholars in his orbit, had knowledge of obscure scripts previously undocumented in Tudor England sent shockwaves through the academic community. It implied access to texts or advisors far beyond the usual European networks and hinted at intellectual exchanges that may have been deliberately concealed from the court. The most striking detail, however, was the placement of these symbols. They were positioned at the boundary where the mural's roots met the bare stone floor, as though serving as a threshold between the visible narrative above and something deeper, hidden below. Some experts propose that the band of characters represented a philosophical foundation for the entire chamber, encoding ideas or doctrines Henry considered essential but too dangerous to express openly. Others theorize that the script might serve as a key, linguistic or symbolic, to interpreting the incomplete mechanical device, the cryptic manuscripts, or even the chamber's broader purpose. Whatever the symbols signified, their presence added yet another layer of complexity to an already bewildering discovery. They suggested that the chamber was not merely a vault of secret objects, but a multidimensional construct of language, ideas, and coded intention, an intellectual labyrinth built by a king determined not only to shape the future, but to communicate with it in ways his contemporaries could never comprehend. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on what archaeologists will uncover in King Henry VIII's tomb? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.